Hello, welcome to the book report. Got a pretty interesting one this time called The Leveling: What's Next After Globalization by Michael O'Sullivan. Um, not didn't 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 really blow me away, but I did finish the book, which is something. I do not finish every book I start, so just finishing it is something. And fascinating perspective. He's kind of a neoliberal Keynesian, definitely right of center, but from a more European right of center. Very, very sane, very strong on social programs. Um, Believes in a not a safety net, but a safety floor. Very strong, education, healthcare. Um, Yet in other ways quite conservative and anyway, it was a very interesting perspective, and so I really enjoyed his perspective, and really wish there were more thinkers like him in the United States on the right wing. Oh, geez, relatively sane people who could actually uh, agree on basic facts. Anyway, another really nice thing about this book was uh, a little bit of history in the development of English democracy. In the mid 1600s, there was civil war, period when the monarchy was actually not in power, and a small group, well, not small, but a big part of the anti-monarch army were called the Levelers, and they came up with some very interesting platforms or statements of what they wanted over a period of 2 to 3 years in a church just outside of central London. And learning a bit of that history was fascinating, and how it tied to later developments in the development of democracy in England and in the U.S. It was basically a failure at the time, but laid the seeds of later movements that were much more successful, and was inherited from earlier developments, of course, as well. Nothing springs out of nothing, right? So that little bit of history was fun, but mainly this book is about the contemporary world. It was I did enjoy some of his he's Irish, and so very connected to common folk and the reality that average people live under. And so I really enjoyed hearing a right of center person actually talk sympathetically toward average people. Um, so few bankers involved in the more egregious episodes of risk taking that led up to the global financial crisis have gone to jail. And he's talking about the bigger one from 2008, 2009. Consumers and households in Ireland, Greece, and the United States will also bear testimony to an absence of a sense of justice following the financial crisis. And then a couple sentences later, in other words, in recent history, those taking risks have not borne the downside consequences of their actions. Hear, hear. Um, I'm all for risk taking, but for the risk taking to be offloaded to the taxpayer, and then the risk takers actually get rewarded with bonuses after they failed miserably, is not capitalism. And that is exactly what happened in 2008, 2009. The people who failed up, actually got pay raises, were protected by the taxpayers, and bore basically zero consequences for their actions, many of which were illegal, frankly. So, anyway, with as much as I agreed with him, though, there were definitely a lot of opinion. I was really hoping for more empirical stuff in here. It was really half an opinion piece more than anything, and And I have to really say I strongly disagree with parts of his economic worldview. He talks about natural recessions and natural rate of unemployment. I strongly disagree with those. In fact, he even talks uncritically of the Phillips curve by Bill Phillips that linked unemployment with inflation, and that is demonstrably false. That relationship does not hold in many situations, and is not a true. It's not a cause and effect. Low unemployment does not cause inflation. And in fact, he wrote this book at a time when the empirical evidence for that was overwhelming, and yet mentions the Phillips curve uncritically, which I think is a real flaw in the book, frankly. So he talks about a natural rate of unemployment, which I strongly disagree with. I think unemployment is an unfair burden on working people that is unnecessary. It's really almost criminal, actually, that we build the system for people to be unemployed, which causes suffering and deprivation for really no reason. I mean, the stated reason is to prevent inflation, but we now know for a fact that that is not true. So anyway, he also brings up that MONIAC, Monetary National Income Analog Computer, Paul Samuelson's, based on Paul Samuelson's circular flow diagram. That computer, actually, even at the time, the guy who created it only wanted to show the flow of money, and yet it's used to show the flow of everything through the economy. And it's really flawed. It has no engine, right? The engine was hidden in the back. And so for him to bring that forward as a legitimate model of the economy is really kind of pathetic. It misses key elements like energy, waste, planetary boundaries, and what Keynes would call animal spirits, right? So a lot of what happens in markets is not rational because humans aren't rational. And so panics and undeserved hype can drive markets up. Panic can drive markets down when they really shouldn't be going one way or the other. So for rational reasons. So anyway, he was advocated for models of the economy that are way too simplistic and miss certain core elements like waste, energy inputs, natural limits, pollution, things like that. I mean, he does mention those things, but the models that he holds up as these great models don't have them, and therefore are not so great, in my opinion. One idea that I had never heard before was to have bonds tied, that the coupon payments of bonds could be tied to GDP and inflation, so that the issuer and the holder of the bond would both be incentivized towards economic growth and to hold down inflation in terms of the yields on those bonds. I thought that was a brilliant idea, particularly in less developed economies that are in need of growth. I thought he called it a Bancor bond, which actually is an old Keynesian idea, but Keynes, as far as I know, never tied coupon payments to GDP and inflation. I thought that was a fascinating idea and definitely worth exploring and experimenting with. Honestly, some sort of cryptocurrency bond with smart contracts built in would be the natural way to implement that in the modern world. I think it would be a great idea. So anyway, definitely worth reading if you're right of center or interested in different perspectives. Definitely a few flaws and a lot of opinion, but it was interesting, and I enjoyed it, particularly the history piece. Cool. Thanks. Happy reading.